Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. Today's conversation represents progress in our achievement of that objective. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship from the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to Jay and his foundation. On the last Authors at Drucker, we featured Guy Kawasaki, host of the Remarkable People podcast and author of Think Remarkable. If you missed it, please check out our YouTube channel for the replay. All right, on to the star of the show. Today's guest is Greg McKeown. Greg has written two New York Times bestsellers, Essentialism, The Disciplined Pursuit of Less, which has been voted by Goodreads as the #1 leadership and success book to read in a lifetime. That's quite a thing. And the second book is Effortless, Make It Easier to Do What Matters Most. Together, they've been published in 37 languages. Greg is a sought-after public speaker and has spoken to over 500 companies while traveling to 40 countries. I don't know how you do it. I just went to a couple of countries in the last month, and I'm worn out, Greg. So I don't know how you do it.
Well, it's so nice to be with you, Dave, and it's really a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, welcome to Authors at Drucker. So today we're really celebrating your 10th anniversary edition of Essentialism. I want you to take us back in time to when this book was coming together in your heart and mind. And how was it born? How did it come to be?
Well, there's sort of two streams that come together in a single river in answer to that question that I think has the power of relevancy for people who manage intergenerational businesses, because I was observing businesses from the startup phase up to, among the largest and most valuable companies in the world, and what that journey looked like for those few companies that make it, and also for the companies that don't. And that's sort of phase one, or, that's stream one, we might say. And I noticed a predictable pattern that when they were focused on just the right few ideas at just the right time, that led to success. So clarity led to success. It was causative. And with success comes an increase of options and opportunities. And that all sounds like the right problem to have, but it does in fact turn out to be a problem if these companies, move to what Jim Collins has called the undisciplined pursuit of more. In which case, companies, however successful they once were, will plateau in their progress or fail altogether. And so in the midst of that, I had a personal experience that helped me to see that the phenomenon I was observing wasn't a business phenomenon. It was a human phenomenon, a relationship phenomenon, a family phenomenon. When I had received an email asking me to go to a client meeting on Friday, and it said, that'd be a very bad time for your wife to have a baby because, you're needed at this meeting. And I'm sure they were just joking, but I definitely felt a pressure, a drive to go to that meeting. So our daughter was born in the early hours of Friday morning. And, I had my phone on, my laptop open. I'm trying to do it all on the basis that then you can have it all. And to my shame, I went to the meeting. And afterwards, I remember one of my colleagues saying, look, the client will respect you for the choice you just made. And the look on their faces didn't evince that sort of respect. But even if it had, it's obvious I made a fool's bargain and learned in the process, if you don't prioritize your life, someone else will. And, if you put those two streams together, you can, it's easy, I think, to see that for families that own businesses, that many of them will feel stretched too thin at work or at home, busy but not necessarily productive, and a sense that their day is constantly being hijacked by other people's agenda for them. In addition to that, to potential family dynamic challenges where does the family begin and the business end, and vice versa? And these are not easy things to unravel And so it seems to me that, this birth of essentialism, quite literally, could be a useful model for people in this situation.
Well, I'm especially happy to bring it to this audience because it feels like there's a constant push and pull between honoring the past and what we did in the past and innovating our way into the future. And I find that families and leaders are great at adding to what we're going to do, but not necessarily subtracting and taking things away. Peter Drucker actually famously talked about, about removing things. Systematic abandonment was what I think that he called it. But why is it so difficult for us to get rid of things, Greg?
That is a complex question, actually, and that there's a lot to it. I mean, one of the things that comes to mind as you were saying that and giving that example was research I came across not when I was writing Essentialism, but when I was writing Effortless. So the difference, just to be clear, Essentialism is about focus, whereas in Effortless is about simplification. And it's particularly this idea of simplification that I think speaks to your question, because there's a marvelous book that was written called, it's by Joseph Tainter, he's a historian, and it's called The Collapse of Complex Societies. But you could apply exactly the same language to the business. You could say, well, the collapse of complex business. And in it, what his breakthrough thesis is that you can analyze all of the collapses that we know about. And of course, that's not all of the societies that have existed. It's just the ones that have left enough remains that we are aware that they once were grand and often enormous. So previous to Tainter, everyone just analyzed each collapse in its own separate way, as if, well, the one was war and one was civil unrest and one was starvation and so on. But what he theorizes, and I think it's compelling, is that they all collapse for the same core reason. And it's like this. In the early days, they're very simple society. They face a problem, they solve the problem, but they do it in such a way that they've added more complexity than may be obvious. And that simple or easy to understand process repeats and repeats and repeats until you get to a point where it requires all of the resources of a society to maintain the complexity. So not to innovate, not to push forward, not to improve, just to maintain. It's an extremely fragile position for society to find themselves in. Likewise, organizations go through the same kind of process. Even if it was well-intended, even if the solutions that were put in place were, in fact, elegant and simple, which of course they often aren't inside of businesses, but even if they are, they still add up over time to becoming sort of scar tissue or zombie projects that never never die, even though no one really is advocating that they should exist. Or you get into the mode of, well, that's the way we've done it. And so a tradition can become a real obstacle to moving forward. I think that in the end, answering your question directly, I think it has a lot to do with a lack of courage. And by the way, I mean, courage feels terrible. Courage feels just exactly like fear. And so it's easy to see why people don't do it. They can often live on the borrowed momentum of the past and just try to kind of keep everything going. Whereas, the people that are really superb at making, let's say 10x progress, they don't do it by just forcing everyone to work 10 times harder. They really do remove so much of the unnecessary complexity that you get a far higher return on your effort. We care about ROI, but in Effortless, what I'm, was trying to think through was how could you increase your ROE? And so I think it takes courage to really eliminate that unnecessary complexity that's getting in the way and making execution harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, so one specific group, imagine a family that's in the third generation. They had a family company. Maybe they sold the operating company and now they have these assets. And now they have all this complexity with trusts and shared decisions and shared ownership. And all they want is simplicity. And that's the only thing they can't have at this point. And so, I think the concepts that you introduce in your book are so helpful to them, to not only to help them, but also to keep their advisors accountable to, our goal is simplicity. Our goal is to personally be able to be enriched by what has been created, so that we can live, thoughtful, meaningful lives, and not be dictated to by, trust documents or whatever that may be.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to what you're saying. I mean, it's so easy to create unintended complexity, unintended additions, hoping that we would get to freedom, hoping that we would be able to enable the child, the grandchild, the great-grandchild to be able to thrive in their time, feeling a sense of intergenerational responsibility, a sense of intergenerational self. I mean, all of that intent, I think, is good and it's worthy. But creating the structures that enable that to happen takes a different kind of mindset. Two things specifically come to mind. So there's a book that was written called The Family Bank. It's by John Nebeker. I wrote the foreword for it, and of course, the family bank mechanism. You have to create a structure that resolves the problem of creating wealth in generation 1, and by generation 3, people do not understand even the way that, like, they don't have necessarily the work ethic and so on to be able to continue the prosperity of the business, but also they don't necessarily even remember why those decisions were made the way they were made. Or then, which is almost as bad, I think, is that you understand it only at a surface level, so that you try to sort of replicate the past, but in a very surface level understanding. You can think, for terms of like a metaphor for that, is all the Silicon Valley leaders who are wearing, black turtlenecks, at least for a season, and copying the shallow surface understanding of Steve Jobs, and lacking all of the courage underneath to actually innovate and what that really takes to do it. And so, the family bank, I think, is one mechanism for trying to overcome what, one of the dilemmas that I think is difficult in an intergenerational situation. I think the other mindset that comes to mind is, it's also happens to be something from Effortless, but it's most people, when they come to simplify, do it exactly the wrong way. And this was a great lesson for me to understand. What most of us do when we feel that things are too complex is we take the complexity, right? You can imagine the organism here in front of us. And let's say that's sort of the 100% of the complexity. And we say, okay, how can we reduce 1%? How can we reduce 5%? How can we reduce 10%? Like you're cutting and slicing away at the complexity. And this is what happened when, if you go back with me, sort of time machine for a moment, while we're thinking of Jobs, when Steve Jobs gets back to Apple, he's gone for 10 years and he's trying to reintroduce innovation as the focal point. And there's a few things he does symbolically. One thing is there's the corridor, the area that had all of the best of, like a hall of fame of past innovations, the original Mac and so on. And he took all of it. It was one of the first things he did, was to take all of it and give it to the Silicon Valley Museum to say, look, that's great. That's good. It's like, we want people to remember that was done, but we cannot think of ourselves through that lens. That was then. We have got to create the future. And that takes deeper understanding of what's going on right now, and not looking back, we have to redo redo that product now. One of the things as they were trying to then create the next big innovation was the development of the eMac. You remember the colorful machine, looked so different than the traditional PC. Well, as part of that, they wanted to add DVD burning, which, I mean, my goodness, that like is so dated in a sense now, because of course we're not using DVDs anymore, and because it's hard to remember that there was a time that there wasn't DVD burning. But at the time, if you wanted to burn a DVD, you had to go to a very specialized organization to do it. And the machine that they would own would be maybe $60,000. So that was the cost of burning a DVD. And Steve's saying, look, I want to make this a standard piece of software on every eMac. So he's trying to hugely advance the innovation around this area. Mm-hmm. They purchase one of these companies, and the people in the company are given a couple of weeks to prepare to share their software and the user manual that goes with it. It's hard to believe it, really, but their user manual was 5,000 pages long. So they know Steve's reputation. They know that it's all about simplification. So they work on it night and day, removing features that, only a certain kind of professional might use, not an average everyday user. And by the time they worked on this night and day for 2 weeks, they were really proud of it. They just looked at it. They just loved how elegant, how simple it looked. They had their presentation ready. Steve walks into the meeting. He's late, about 20 minutes late, and they walk in, and he walks up to the whiteboard and he says, look, he draws the rectangle. He puts one button on it, writes burn. He says, look, we're going to drag the music, the file that you want to burn, into the rectangle, and you press the button. That's the software we're going to build. And I spoke with one of the people that were in that meeting, and he said, look, in that moment, we just immediately became embarrassed about our presentation. We never shared it. We never talked about it. We sort of just put it all away. And he said, but it was worth it for the lesson. And this is the lesson, the driving point. The mindset is start with zero. He was doing exactly the opposite. They were going from all that complexity. Look at how far we've done. He said, always resetting, start with zero. What can we do it in one step? Can we make it effortless for the user? Truly effortless. One thing, drag, drop, done. This is what he was constantly going for. And the same principle can be applied to any design situation where we find that we're dealing with growing complexity.
Very interesting. In Essentialism, one of the concepts that you talk about quite a bit is the power of choice. It seems like we unintentionally give away our agency or somehow feel powerless to make change. Why is agency so crucial in living kind of that essentialist life?
Well, I mean, it's look, there is sort of one primary asset resource that we have, and it's this undilutable ability to choose. And it cannot be given away. It can only be forgotten. And by forgotten, it could be that somebody had a high sense of agency at one time in their life, and then they've lost it over time. Maybe they go to school and then they learn that there are consequences for using agency in a way that isn't the norm. Maybe that's the process, or maybe they never even learned. I mean, their sense of agency, that they have choice, and so if your family of origin didn't have a high sense of agency, or it wasn't emphasized, taught, and empowered, enabled, just even given the idea you have choice, how are you using that initiative? What are you doing with it? If you don't have it there, if you don't have it in school, you go into a corporation that is often reduces people's sense of agency, even unintentionally doing it, just through the silencing, sometimes suffocating force of hierarchy. And so all of that means that if you go through life with a sense of, well, I have to do it all. And you also live in a time of, as we do, of absolutely deafening levels of noise and inputs, then you will be unaware of your agency. And
so maybe that's the key then. Maybe that's the key. It's just the awareness. So like daily awareness of what choices am I making today? What choices have I made today consciously? And maybe it is just being awake to it that changes everything for us.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I'm doing new research now, and one of the things that I have been fascinated with is the difference between people who have an awareness. I mean, you're asking about choice and agency, but a similar word to that would be awareness of the way we think, the way we operate. You know, whether you're a prisoner to the mind, inside of it and unaware of it. So you're just going through life as if there's no OS system running. The way we see the world and the way we experience it and the way we think about it is exactly literally how it is. And it seems to me that there are, it's a very high percentage of people who live exactly in that way, that are stuck in their head and unaware of it. So in a quite imprisoned state, or a language I like is locked. They're in a locked state. And it's a big step forward to simply be introduced to the idea, the theory of mind. Once you start to say, oh, hold on, I don't see it how it is. There is a process of all of the life experience I've had and everything I've ever been taught that is filtering my experience. And just even to step into that state, I think goes from locked to being limited. Okay, it's not limitless yet, but you sense a change because you're not a prisoner anymore. You become the observer, and you have the observer's advantage. And that literally, I think, in that little shift, it's like one small step, but one great step. I think that's agency. I mean, who's observing you? Who's observing your mind? Who's observing your lifestyle, your choices, your habits, your communication norms? That observer, this is you. This is your true identity. Your ability to choose is who you are. And from that vantage point, you can begin what I think is, like the ultimate adventure of all of life, because now you can exit your own mind and enter somebody else's and listen to them and understand them. You can look at your business instead of your business running you. You can look at your business. You can work on your business, not in it. Same with your family and your relationships. And I think that's sort of, let me call that the first big unlock. But my goodness, I think that there's hundreds and hundreds, maybe it's infinite number of unlocks that can follow as you start to become aware. The way I've been thinking is limited. What if I could stretch the mind? What if I could understand what I didn't before? What if I could accelerate the process past the assumptions that other people hold or that I've held in the past? And for me, it's been a really tremendous, not just research in a sort of academic sense, but research in a life-changing way for me.
Well, there's been a few different points in my life where I feel like that's kind of a disrupt yourself type of moment. Whitney talks about that in her books, Disrupt Yourself. And one was, as a 19-year-old young man moving to South America, serving a 2-year mission for my church in Uruguay. That was the ultimate, like, the United States is not the world, and my little community is not the world.
Right.
And now I get to see things. I get to see culture. I get to see how people express themselves, how they interact with each other. That was a very, poignant point in my life that changed. And there's other things, when you get married and you share a life with someone. I mean, that's another thing. Like, you see things that, just you were blind to before. And I think creating and encouraging those experiences in our life so that we can become flexible in how we think about things and just have new eyes, develop new
Yes.
eyes over time. I think it's exciting, but it does take some intentionality. It's easy to just do what we've done yesterday.
100%. It is easy to do what we've done yesterday. And also, I want to just dissect for a second what I think there's a difference between, although they're really related, I think it's like a half step, what you're describing, when you have a new experience, like going to South America as a 19-year-old on a mission, like getting married and so on. These are half step moments, meaning opportunities to break out of your own mind and observe it.
Oh, I like where you're going. Go ahead. Go.
It isn't always done, because the opportunity is there where somebody goes, oh my goodness, I suddenly see that I was, in this case, American centric, or in my case, British centric. Like, what else could I be? What else could you possibly
That's all
be?
I knew. Yeah.
That's all you know. So fish discover water last. So we discover our deepest assumptions last. And so when we have these moments, they're like glitches in the matrix. And so I think of them as 0.5 steps, not full steps, because they're a moment to, whoa, well, how was I seeing it before? What does that mean that I was seeing it differently before? Well, how am I currently seeing it? Like, there's a chance to escape and start to really become the observer. But I'm not sure that always happens. In fact, I'm positive it doesn't, because for a start, people can come back from a mission or from travel and they go back into normal life. And then that thing was like kind of like a vacation. Like, okay, that's just a thing over there. This is real. That's just, almost pretend. It's almost like a dream happened. And even sometimes when people travel, and I'm fully in favor of travel, and have enjoyed traveling myself and want to travel more. So I definitely believe these things can expand the mind and are necessary if we want to stretch our minds. But it's something more to actually have the courage to go, okay, how are you seeing the world? What are your what assumptions am I still making? And so that we really do shift into the observer. And then from the observer, we can become more of a creator. What would I want to create? And so on. I could riff for a while.
I love it. I love it. And I think that's good that you kind of point out that it's a half step, because we still have choice. Are we going to slow down enough to consider, is this something different than what I expected? Is it something that I need to change, or something in my mind that is now molded a little bit and shaped a little bit differently? I love the concept. One of the other concepts you talk about in Essentialism is play, which I think is, at some point it feels like, well, how does play really fit in there? But I'd love to hear why is play so important, and then I'll share a quick story about.
Launch with the story. Start with the story.
Okay, I'll start with the story. So I came back from South America. I was just in Brazil and Uruguay speaking at a conference. I was very tired. I was jet lagged, and I came home to a story that my 7-year-old daughter had not been speaking as kindly to her mother as she maybe should have.
Right.
And
Dad's home.
Yeah, Dad's home. So I had the choice, how was I going to, try to remedy this, or at least talk to her about it? And maybe my natural inclination would be to get after her, because, that's not appropriate to talk to your mother that way. Luckily, I decided to go and take her and play on the skateboard with her in the parking lot across the street. And it changed everything, because it wasn't the negative thing that happened was not the focus. When we played together and we had an experience together and we laughed together, then on the walk home, I had the opportunity to say, hey, I heard about this going on when I was gone. Can you make an effort to talk nicer to your mom? And I'm telling you, it was a very different experience than I've experienced before. So maybe I experienced your book in play, and I took the advantage to try a different approach. But teach us about play and why it matters.
Well, maybe I can get back to play specifically, but your story represents not just a story about play, although it does. It represents, I think, a continuation of the subject we were on before about escaping one's own mind. Now, it happened to be through play, but play is what your daughter wants to do. That's what all children want to do most of the time, because play is the work of childhood. Mm-hmm. It's one of the reasons that traditional school, I think, can be so limited and limiting, is because it's not centered in play. It's centered in structure, like a factory. And I think that's really suboptimal in many, many ways for many people. But in playing, right, in what you really did was enter her world. Mm-hmm. Like, she didn't enter your world. Your world was, you'd just come back from a conference. You'd just been in Brazil. You know, that's your world. She didn't enter your world. You entered her world. Mm. And you can only really enter other people's world. Well, maybe that's not quite true, but when you become more aware of your own mind and your own, the gravitational pull that takes you back into your own, you know, the kind of egocentrism that we all are born into, when you become very conscious of that, you can intentionally enter other people's worlds. And so whether it's through play with children, which, you know, I certainly think is almost all of the time the entry point for young children, you could do it with a teenager, and it might not be through play, it might be through some other means, but it's you exiting your own mind and entering their world and seeing how they see things. And what I have found is that basically that approach removes resistance. And so, you know, the friction between humans isn't just that people want different things. That's what a negotiator would say or would think through. That might be their lens. Or two different people want two different things. Yeah, okay. But that isn't really the friction. The friction is that we don't feel understood, that we are fearful we will lose something if we work with somebody, you know, if we interact with somebody else. You know, we have something to lose because they don't understand where we're coming from, or they'll act in a way that maybe they don't really take much from us physically, but we feel really misunderstood. And I know almost nothing worse than that. It's sort of like the absolute.
You used the word act, and I think that kind of nailed it for me. I felt like I was supposed to act upon her because she was supposed to be in trouble. And because I didn't act upon her and just, like you said, entered her world, it allowed me to just invite her to take action for herself.
It's like being a child whisperer, but the same can be true for a leader. You can become a leader whisperer. You can become an influence whisperer. You can be an innovator whisperer. It's all to do with the degree to which you are entering other people's worlds so that they feel understood. They feel safe. They know that you actually are together with them, that it isn't adversarial. Mm-hmm. And then from within, you can say in the gentlest possible way, hey, listen, you know, I did notice this, you know, maybe you could work. Oh, really? Okay. What can I do to be better? Because there's no resistance. Imagine what leadership would be like if there was no resistance.
But it takes actual care and curiosity. And I think sometimes as business leaders, maybe our agenda is so much higher than those that we're working with, that maybe we don't care enough about how they are actually doing, or maybe we aren't as curious about maybe why the best them isn't showing up. And because we're not curious enough or caring enough, we don't get the best. We don't get the best from other people.
Yes, I certainly think that a cost of being stuck in your own head is that you will imagine, like, a person who is in a low level of maturity in the way they see the world, right? So self-oriented, will imagine that entering other people's worlds will be much more boring than being in their own mind. And that's that's sort of an evidence. In an extreme case, it's because to a really immature person, other people aren't even real. They're just that they're barely characters in the movie, right? In the Greg McKeown movie, they're barely even characters. They just come and go like a you're inside a movie, like a computer game, and they're just characters, and they can just be used because they're not even people. That's not even hasn't entered it. And from that mindset, listening, for example, is truly boring. And that's how they experience it. It's like, I don't care. What do you think? I don't care about that. Oh, yeah. Stop talking about that. And many people find listening excruciatingly boring. And there's more reasons than just the one I've described. But what happens is you exit your own mind and can start to really, truly shelve your own mind and enter the world of another. At least my own personal experience is that there really is actually nothing richer in the whole world. That it is that if normal life is black and white, it is Technicolor. That there is no end to the fascination that is possible. And I don't really know why it is that that's how I've experienced my life, or why it is that seems to be true for others as they make the shift. But there is something so deep, so connected. I mean, to be able to literally be within the mind of another person, you can sort of think about it in mind meld types of sci-fi terms, to be connected instead of to be completely disconnected and assume you know the other side. So once you experience this, your curiosity, I think, increases, not because you go, I have to be curious, but because there's so much to be curious about. That you've heard, I'm sure, the idea that the knowledge and the knowledge circumference. You're familiar with this idea? So our knowledge, if our knowledge is very small, right? You can imagine a small circle. Yeah. Then the outer edges, the circumference, is our sense of ignorance, and as our knowledge grows, our sense of ignorance grows, and so therefore our curiosity grows. There's so much to learn. And I certainly find that is true for me. A few years ago, I sort of woke up feeling just appalled at how little I knew about everything, and working so tirelessly since then to try and do something about that. And of course, as you go forward, you become aware. Well, that continues. Yeah. But the postage stamp view of the world that we have in our minds expands a little over time, and everything gets richer the more connected and aware we are of each other.
So we've talked about connection and how powerful that is, and I'm going to go all the way in the opposite direction. And Peter Drucker was famously successful at becoming unavailable and making himself scarce and protecting his time so that he could do what he felt was the optimal thing that he could do for the world, which was write and do some consulting. So can you talk about, that essentialist and why becoming unavailable, I guess, has been so important to you to getting things done that are the most meaningful to you?
Well, if you don't create space to think, to work, there will be none now. The fight for our minds is like war level. There have been extremely deliberate attempts for certainly a decade, but that's just obvious. It's certainly, I certainly think it's been longer than that there has been an assault on the senses, an assault on our attention, and so that's the status quo. Whatever the device in our pocket is, whatever it is, it's not a phone. I sort of think about it something like a $3 trillion military grade, not just distracting machine, but disorienting machine, which is much worse. And unless we're conscious, we're no match for it. And so, okay, this is the, you could be above average in creating space to think and to do, and you'd still be a non-essentialist in this culture. So what I would advocate to people about this isn't, okay, you have to take control of your whole life. I don't know that that's realistic for most people, but I do think this. I think we'll take control of half an hour of your day. The power half an hour is how I've come to, describe it. And basically, ever since I finished Essentialism, I've had a whole variety of requests for, well, how do you put it into action? And what I felt was, well, that's what the book is. Like if you read the book, that's enough. It's the mindset, and there's also a skill set taught there. But I have learned over time, people do need the tool set. And so, in fact, I was under contract something like 10 years ago, close to 10 years ago, to create a kind of journal or something like that about Essentialism. And after a few months of working on it, I just got out of the contract because I just thought, well, I just don't think the world needs another journal, and I don't think I have something to offer that's better than maybe what I've seen already. And so but slowly and quietly in the background, I said, I'm just going to keep iterating my own experiences and try myself and teach it to other people and see if through that process, one day, maybe I'll get to a point where I say, yes, this actually works and it makes a big difference, and that your return on effort is high. And so, I mean, as of this conversation, I mean, it's I literally just got sent like the first copy, but I have this tool finally. It's called the Essentialism Planner. I mean, this is literally the first prototype that they sent to me, or not prototype, it's the actual thing. And in it, there's a personal quarterly offsite section. It's designed as sort of a 90-day process. But I think the really distinctive thing is this half an hour process. Excuse me. Learned through all this iteration. It sounds very simple now, but it has 3 sections. It's what is, what, so what, now what. And the first thing you're doing is free writing all of that noise in your head. Noise comes from the Latin nausea. And so we feel nauseous as we are so bombarded with noise as we are today. And so you want to get all that noise out onto the page. So that's step 1. It's just, no, you're not thinking, you're just flowing. Step 2 is connecting the dots, right? Knowledge is ubiquitous, it's free, it's cheap now. So it's the ability to synthesize that's really the advantage. And so that's step 2. So what? You're saying, well, what does this mean? Mm-hmm. What does all that noise mean? What's the signal in that sound? What does it mean for me? What does it mean for my business, for my family? And then step 3 is, I call it the 1, 2, 3 method. So this is the now what? And you're saying, what's the one priority for today? So 2 to 3 hours, you want to focus on that if you can. What are 2 things that are essential and urgent? And then what are 3 things that are maintenance items? I sort of think about them as the laundry of our life, because it's literally true about laundry, but of course there's other things that are symbolically like laundry. But what they mean are things that if you don't do them today, tomorrow and the next day is much harder. You want to make the future as effortless as possible so you can increase your contribution without burning out. I think if someone will take half an hour, even if they don't manage to do it every day, they dip into this planner, for example, or use their own system, but reclaim that much time, first half hour of the day, or the last half hour of the day, or the first half hour of your work day, 30 minutes. I think I'm willing to say something like this. If you can't get to 30 minutes, you don't really have control in any meaningful sense. And I don't do it every day, so I'm not trying to be, holier than thou about it with people. Sure. But it's a good litmus test for how much of a sense of control we actually have and how strong our agency is.
I was just thinking about, the immense pressure that you must have on yourself being the father of essentialism and probably being called out on it on a daily basis by your spouse or Now, Greg, is that an what an essentialist would do?
Yeah, I love that. No, I'm an aspiring essentialist myself, and I would say actually how I approach. There is some pressure to do that, and it's funny, and I just don't pretend to be what I'm not. But one of the things that I have found that's helpful is that what an essentialist, like, I know you was really just making a joking point. Now I'm going all like deep about it, but I think
it's a journey, right? You're not arriving at being an essentialist. It's a journey, but that you've chosen to take.
Yes, but an essentialist looks different to every person. An essentialist is a process, a way of focusing, but it's a disciplined pursuit of less, right? It's the antidote to the problem that I described at the beginning, the undisciplined pursuit of more. It's a way to become successful at success. So what it looks like for me right now is really amazing for me, but it's really different than how it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. For me right now, it looks like taking responsibility for my life and for my choices and trying to do what I've been mentioning before, unlocking a limitless type of life. And so I know when I'm in that mode and when I'm not, and it's not the same as surface level, less or more. Like it's kind of a surface level, almost immature way of thinking about essentialism. I mean, that's how I kind of framed it. So it's not like it's anybody else's fault. But underneath those words of less or more, it's to do with, am I living with high agency about what I really think I should be doing, or am I doing something other than that? Going along, living on the momentum of the past, doing what other people are doing. It really is a measure of how I say it, how are you being? Are you being the best version of you? Are you breaking out of the old version to go from a 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0? Because in the end, essentialism isn't something you do. It's like, that would be ironic, right? Like, essentialism is one more thing I have to stuff into my already overstuffed life. That would like miss the whole point. Essentialism is something you become. You become an essentialist. And it's more like this: become more and more of who you really are and less of who you really aren't. And that takes an ongoing learning process. That's metanoia, right? The Latin word for repentance, or that's what it was translated into English, means to see yourself and others and the world and God in with new eyes. And so I think about becoming an essentialist like that. It's not that you're following a checklist of exactly what somebody else thinks an essentialist looks like. It's becoming more of you and fulfilling the measure of your creation. And that's a discernible state to live in. And you know it, or I know it, when I feel I am taking responsibility for my life. I am going to actually act for myself. And I'll make loads of mistakes because that's built into the process. If I'm not making some mistakes, if I'm not getting something wrong, I'm certainly not making enough personal choices. And so anyway, I'm sort of riffing off your question, but
I'm a huge fan of questions, and I think we spend far too little time developing great questions. And I think what you're talking about is this journey to essentialism is really about asking ourselves really courageous questions about how we spend our time, how we spend our energy, and taking a good look in the mirror and saying, am I who I can become, or am I on the right path to even fulfill the potential that I've been given? Anyway, some really deep introspective work with what you've created. Maybe just two more questions. Here at Claremont Graduate University, we were fortunate to not only have Peter Drucker, but we also had the father of flow, Professor Chick. His last name is really difficult for me. Csikszentmihalyi.
Csikszentmihalyi, yeah, well done.
So he talked about flow, and you talked in your work about flow. How do you go about finding flow?
Well, I mean, it's hard to respond to that without referencing Effortless, because Effortless is about let's work backwards. Imagine three concentric circles. On the outside of the circle, you have effortless results, right? So a scenario in which, imagine the scenario in which the results that matter most to you flow to you without force. And that doesn't mean without effort, but without force.
Not a lot of friction.
Without high levels of friction, without any violation of other people, of your or even of yourself. Like it's a imagine that system, right? So results are flowing to you.
Yeah.
It's residual results. So the difference between so we live in a time of such limitless possibilities because we live in an age of such extraordinary leverage.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you start with that, and then you say, okay, well, what does that, how do you get to that? You have to start making the actions of your life as effortless as possible. Not because you're lazy, right? Like easy and lazy are not at all, they don't equal each other. But sometimes an insecure overachiever will operate as if easy is lazy. And that's completely false. It's just wrong. It's definitionally wrong, because easy is something that doesn't require a lot of effort, and lazy is you're not willing to put in effort. And everybody listening to this is already willing to put in effort, so that we don't have to worry about laziness. Instead, we have to say, how can we make our actions, what is the process to make our actions as smooth and simple as possible? But then before all of that, the sort of the highest leverage point is the state of our mind. How clear we are, how aware we are of what we really want, what's getting in the way of it, how we can make decisions that will help us to take advantage of this age, this I don't want to call it age of leverage, but maybe that's a decent way of thinking about it, that we live in, where you can, people can 1000x things now. Normal people. I'll give you an example. So a friend of mine, Jessica Jakely, her then husband, and a small group of people, student age at the time, they go on a trip to Africa. They're trying to make a difference, particularly to entrepreneurs. And they go to a Muhammad Yunus presentation, so they're learning about microloans. So they suddenly think, oh, that's cool. If we could, we could get to know someone here and we could help them. So they meet this entrepreneur. She's living subsistence level, the opposite of the effortless mindset, right? It's the opposite, because she has to put in all of her time every day, all day, to survive. That's just to feed her children and hopefully herself. And so they say, okay, well, what would help? What would help you escape that prison, in a sense, and be able to leverage a little better life? And she said, well, if I had enough money to be able to stop working for a couple of days and actually go and meet the people that I'm actually ultimately buying my produce from, she's selling produce on the street, I could renegotiate with them directly and have things delivered, and it wouldn't come through a middleman. And so that would make a big difference to me. As they ask how much this would be, and it's something I don't remember precisely, but maybe it's $100 or something fairly, maybe it was $500, I think was required to be able to try and do this. And so they thought, well, okay, we could put the money together and just give her this. And then they thought, well, Muhammad Yunus, microloan. Okay, we could microloan it to her. And then we would help 10 times as many people, because they'd repay it, and that's the benefit of this. And she's feeling good about it too. So there's that's a good, 10x would be great for the same basic effort to get a 10x result. That would be effortless. And then somebody says, well, hold on, we could leverage beyond that. We could have a website that would enable other people like us who haven't come here and haven't made all these connections and understanding to be able to provide microloans. So this is what led to the birth of Kiva.org.
Kiva.
They have given now $1.3 billion in loans. There's a 97% repayment of those loans. And so the work has only just begun, or rather, the contribution has only just begun. But if you connect those dots again, you say, well, the clarity of thinking of that group of people to uncover the idea, and then, that one person's suggestion, well, maybe we should actually create the website because then other people would be able to do it. That moment of clarity, it's almost like you could touch that moment in time. Like that was one of those, atomic impact moments, because suddenly they're like, oh, well, we could arrange all of these tools and arrange our execution and so on in such a way that we could, like, what's the ratio? $500 gift, let's call that the 1X. And of course, when I start talking about these ideas, when you say, 10X results for the same effort, that just sounds ridiculous, or it just say, hyperbole. But of course, what they've done is way more than 10X. It's more than 100X. It's more than 1,000X. And on we could go with the numbers. The difference so what we want is to be able to get into an effortless state so that we can see clearly, so that we can execute as effortlessly as possible, so that we can use our resources to leverage unbelievable contributions and impact in the world. And I think not only to me is that inspiring personally, but I think it's like an idea whose time has come because so many people feel either burned out or on the edge of burnout right now. And it's not because they're not diligent or not, good people or not motivated or any of those things. I think it's because they have limited mindset about how you would even make impact in the world. And so they're living in a state of constant frantic effort. Effort today is mostly cognitive exertion. And so we're living in red brain all the time. If those people that went to Africa had been in red brain, they would not have had the clarity to give them the insight that they could execute to build a system that produced this kind of result. And so in today's world, it's not just that it's harder to have that effortless state where we're focused and clear and calm and at optimal levels. It's that, it's not only it's harder to get there, it's that if you can, it's so much more valuable. This is the thing to be able to manage, to be able to try and push it out. And of course, the Power Half an Hour is one attempt at doing that, but it's only an illustration of the need we have to create space, connect the dots so that we can make a great impact, much greater than the past, and without burning out. So it's a pretty good value proposition that comes from a shift in mindset. Absolutely.
Greg, I want to be conscious of our time. I've really thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. You've given us some great gifts in just you making space to create essentialism and effortless, I think is a great gift you've given to the world. And we appreciate you spending this time with us today on Authors at Drucker.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you.